and it's May 17th, 2021, and I'm going to call the Anacortes City Council meeting to order. And our first items tonight are on agenda item 2, and the first one is my COVID-19 update. And this is as of today. Governor Inslee announced the state is moving towards statewide June 30th reopening date. All counties in Washington will move to phase 3 of the Healthy Washington Roadmap to Recovery. Reopening plan is effective from May 18th until June 30th. Governor Inslee also announced that Washington will fully adopt masking guidance issued by the CDC. This guidance is for fully vaccinated people, meaning people who are 2 weeks removed from their second shot of Pfizer, Moderna, or the one-shot Johnson & Johnson vaccine. The guidance does not apply to the healthcare settings like hospitals, long-term care, or doctor's offices, correctional facilities, homeless shelters, or schools. And the federal order requires masks on public transportation remains in place. In Skagit County, as of Saturday, we've had 5,075 positive cases. We've had 72 fatalities, and 326 people have been hospitalized. In the 98221 area code, the cases remain between 430 and 439. At Island Hospital, they've tested 16,015 people with a total positive cases of 326. And the total admitted to Island Hospital has been 59. And we've had 0 fatalities. In the state of Washington, there's been 425,000 cases of COVID. There's been 5,663 deaths. In the United States, 33 million cases of COVID and 586,000 deaths. Worldwide, 163 million confirmed cases of COVID-19, including 3.38 million deaths, and that was reported to us by the World Health Organization. Is there any discussions or comments? Okay, then I'm going to move to item 2B, which is our Skagit Law and Justice Council report, and I believe that's Councilman Miller.
Thanks, Mayor. The Law and Justice Council met last Tuesday. Myself and Chief Small were in attendance via a Zoom meeting, and the one thing I did neglect to do was dime out Chief Small for his last Law and Justice Council meeting. But the main topic of the meeting was impact teams. Compass Health, as we may have talked about before, for over a year, Compass Health has been working with the Skagit County Sheriffs for essentially what we like to call, I think we like to use the term social worker ride along or embedded social worker model. But anyway, the report from Compass Health, Marla Johns, was about how that's working since they've put it with the Skagit County Sheriff's Department. They've put 3 positions, actually, 2 funded by the Washington Association of Washington State Association of Police Chiefs, and 1 funded by the state. And so it was basically a report on how that's going. Not a lot of data really to pull out of that. It's just that it's going on. And that's been going on since September. You can learn a little bit more about it if you go to Compass Health. They have some stories about what they're doing there. But essentially the kind of questions that I was asking had to do with how they're dispatching, just the technical referrals. And mainly it involves essentially self-referrals for calls that might be of civil nature rather than criminal nature. So interesting things that we can learn. And I know the HASC committee is looking at some of the different options that are out there to go with our model that we're using with the Anacortes Family Center. So again, if you want to learn more about it, Compass Health has some good things on their website to take a look at about the impact team. And impact stands for Integrated Model of Police and Crisis Teams. So that's it.
Thank you. Any questions? All right, we'll move on now to item 2C.
Hey, dear.
Yes, Mr. Young.
Just one question for Mr. Miller, and I know he indicated early on that it's just preliminary data, but I was just curious, about the inner workings of the two teams, meaning the embedded social worker, if you would, and how that is meshed together with the police force from the initial thinking to see what they're really believing now about it.
Yeah, I guess the best way to answer that question is they're actually riding in the patrol cars with the sheriffs. So I think they said 07 to 1 a.m. again for those three positions. I'm not sure if it's 7 days a week yet, but just maybe one more time, ask me the question.
No, I guess what I was and you are answering part of it. What I was really looking to was that relationship between the two, meaning the bonding and hand-to-hand work together for that common good. Sometimes it's a little nervous at first, but after you get into it, you work through those things.
Again, I think to answer that question, actually riding in obviously there's more than one Skagit County Sheriff vehicle out on the roads any one time, but there's one with this impact team member. So if there's an opportunity for them to dispatch, they can do so. Obviously geography, it's a big county. So it doesn't always work, but they can do follow-up or initial dispatch. So there's opportunities there. So I think we can learn a lot from it.
All right, at this time, we'll move on to item 2C, which is our Finance Committee update.
Here.
Mr. Walters.
The Finance Committee received a presentation from a software vendor that is an alternative to the Socrata vendor that we looked at previously. It's called Domo. They had a apparently more flexible product. It has less, maybe a little less polish, but we got an in-depth presentation, and that was the totality of the committee meeting. So we haven't had any discussions about it yet. We'll be looking at some examples of where it's in use. It seems maybe a little less government focused and more broadly applicable to other types of entities. But after reviewing that, hopefully we'll have some recommendation for full council on a software product that would let us get better, us as city council, but also the public, get better insight into how the budget functions, transactions that occur, and how the finances of the city are organized.
Thank you. And finally, item 2D, our Public Works Committee report.
Mayor Gear?
Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. The Public Works Committee met at 5 p.m. today. Mr. Walters, Mr. Young, Mr. Buckenmeyer, and representatives from Brown and Caldwell, the consultants who are exploring the universe of options for a potential replacement of our wastewater treatment plant. So we talked about that. There has been quite a lot of research into different options, and that is an agenda item tonight. So we will all be hearing more details on that. The other thing that we talked about tonight was the risk resiliency assessment that has been undertaken by former Fire Chief Richard Curtis, and he gave us an update on his report, the risk assessment that he has completed, and also the emergency response plan, which is currently in progress and will be finished at the end of next month. And that will include measures that the city can take to lower the risk to our water treatment system, both from any threats, both human and natural. So we'll be hearing a lot about that probably in July as a full council. And that's it.
Thank you. So at this time, we'll go to item 3, which is public comment. If anyone would like to speak to the council on anything that is not on the agenda this evening, you may do so at this time. Please raise your hand. All right. Julie, do you hear me?
I do, thank you.
Go ahead.
Hi. Okay, thank you. So I'd just like to make sure that I have a chance to give my input on what I understand to be some kind of renewed issues around planning departments, critical areas ordinance as it relates to our trail systems in the Anacortes forest lands.
Okay.
So I would like to just kind of give again my continuing support for the positive, I guess, history and continued use and future use and benefit to our community to allow and promote even cycling on all trails, whether they be the Tommy Thompson or dirt trails. Couple things that maybe aren't really focused on a lot in the past that I sort of an important to add. A lot of people aren't familiar that our cyclists in the community are capable of biking to the locations they go to. I'm getting a lot of feedback from the speaker here. I assume you can only hear one time on my speaker.
We can hear you. I don't know why you're getting feedback.
Somebody might not have theirs on mute. That's okay. So our cyclists are able to get to the trails without having to drive, and that reduces the carbon footprint as well as the traffic and the parking in those areas. So on a given day, for example, if you go to the Whistle Lake parking lot, it's become much more popular in the last few years. You'll see that there's cars that are backed up all the way down past the city property into the county property into private property and back up the hill along to the side of the road. That's not an issue with cyclists. They can go there, no parking is needed. And I work a lot with the students and on the mountain bike team locally, and I can certainly attest to the fact that at least half of our kids get to those trails by bike. But just as a personal user as well, that's something that I find quite rewarding, and also just simple for us. And then likewise for the Tommy Thompson and possibly the future of the Glamis Channel Trail, I'd like to again reiterate that that's a benefit to our air and our clean air as our cyclists are not generating any carbon when they go out to the ferry or go for a ride on Murch's Point via the Tommy Thompson. And then the last thing I'd like to say is that I'm a huge advocate and believer in the benefit of wheels for our disabled people in our community. I had a mother who had ALS and moved to Anacortes for just her last year of her life and was able to use her motorized wheelchair to do some phenomenally fun things in that last year that she wouldn't have been able to do in an area that didn't have general support for wheels. So that's it. Thank you for giving me your time.
Okay, any other members of the audience who'd like to speak at this time? All right, hearing no one, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is our consent agenda, item 4A through C.
Mayor Gear.
Mr. Miller.
Move to approve consent agenda items A through C.
Second.
A motion by Mr. Miller, a second by Mr. Young. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, at this time, we'll move to other business under item 5, and we have 5A. This is our legislative update. This is open for public comment. And tonight we have two guests with us. We have Senator Liz Lovelet and Representative Alex Rammel with us, and I'll let them do their presentation. Welcome, both of you. You can turn on your screens and your mics and you can talk to us.
I think you have to turn on our screens.
Okay, Matt? All right, I have a Matt help me. Oh, there's Alex.
evening. Thanks for the opportunity to present tonight. I don't think we choreographed this too much ahead of time. Mayor, do you want to tell us how long you'd like us to talk for? I assume we'll reserve at least half that time for questions and answers.
Well, I was hoping, you know, within 30 minutes, we could have a total presentation and then hopefully questions, or does that sound reasonable? Okay, and then Liz, your mic is still on, my dear. Okay, thank you.
My camera went on, now my mic's on.
All
Alex,
right.
you want to go ahead and start?
Sure. I'll get us started and then weave some of the exciting topics for you as well, though. Really appreciate the chance to come and present to the City Council. We had an exciting legislative session in much the same format that we're here tonight. In fact, I'm standing in the same place I spent most of the last 4 months. And it's a pleasure to get to report back on some of the successes. We'll do our best to kind of cover a lot of things that happened, and I'll kind of focus on things that relate to either things the city has communicated with us about or that we've heard from folks in the community or priorities. But always happy to sit down and spend more time with any of you to talk more about priorities or thoughts for what we can do next year. So just starting off sort of broad sweep of things, the House Democratic and the Senate Democratic leadership sat down early in the before the beginning of the legislative session and said, you know, with everything happening right now, we really want to focus on our top 4 priorities of public health response to the pandemic, economic recovery, response to systemic and racial injustice, and prioritizing the climate crisis. And I think we brought home significant movement on all of those priorities, and share a little bit about some of those things tonight. Although we've got Democratic majorities in both House and Senate, I think we work together in a bipartisan way far more often than not. I've heard that the number is 93% of the bills that we passed this year included both Democrats and Republicans at some point in that process. And the last thing I'd sort of emphasize here at the top is just the collaboration between the legislators in the 40th, but also our counterparts in the 10th and the 42nd. We meet regularly as a team to sort of think about the strategy, the needs of the community. We met before the session to think strategically about what committee assignments each of us would request. For example, a priority for us was to make sure that each of the financial committees in the House had representatives from sort of the northwest corner of the state. And so our commitment is really to working together, and I think doing that is valuable for the communities we serve, and I'm hopeful that it's also shows up in the day-to-day when individual constituents reach out to one or more of our offices. We kind of, our teams, our legislative assistants work together to share that information and make sure that if one of us is on the right committee to better address a particular issue, that question gets routed to the right person. So I've got a handful of things I could run through in terms of the sort of topics and things that we've covered. Senator, do you want to jump in here and we can bounce back and forth, or how do you want to go?
Sure. I kind of made a rough list of just things that I felt like would be really pertinent, particularly to the city and to Skagit County. But just broadly, what I will say is I'm really proud of the work we got done. There was kind of a sense at the beginning of session of how are we going to actually work on stakeholdering bills? How are we going to get the right level of community engagement to make sure that we're putting forward the right policies at the right time in order to be responsive to the needs. But what I will say is we never stopped. We got back from the session from 2020 and just dug right into what was going to be needed in terms of leadership at the state level, that cooperation to the local levels. So we did a number of listening tours, just around small business recovery and response. We did it around police reform and accountability. We really try to meet in with our local electeds as often as possible to make sure that we're communicating both ways. We're elevating your concerns and questions and issues to the state level, but that we're also communicating to make sure that the policies that we're working on at the legislature really represent the values of the district and the cities. So just a couple of things that I'll touch on, because I'm sure that will spur some questions that I think are going to, at the city level, you are going to have to deal with things like police reform and accountability, all of the multitude of bills that came forward, many of which had support from police, first responders, WASPIC, and other organizations. We had, and additionally, you'll need to deal with the Blake decision. So working on how indigent defense works, working on how your police stations are going to be able to respond to personal possession of drugs. And so there's a whole long phasing in of that so that we can make sure that we get that dialed in right and that the resources are there that you need. Along those lines, one of the other huge wins for the legislature this year is the formation of a 988 number. So for those of you, especially that serve on public safety committee, you know that a lot of the 911 calls that our first responders are called into are really dealing with somebody in a mental health crisis. So we had some incredible leadership in the House and the Senate to make sure that we now have a 988 number so that people who are in that crisis mode are able to be connected with services that are outside of the police response method that we've done. Mr. Miller was talking about the impact program. That's kind of the preliminary underpinnings of some of these movements. We also had a massive effort on housing and eviction reform. We knew that not only did we have a potential wave of homelessness coming as the eviction moratorium lifted, but also a lot of landlords, particularly smaller landlords, that needed to have their bills paid. So did some tremendous work on both streamlining the dispute resolution center process, but also capitalizing the coffers of those programs that help landlords get the assistance they need to make sure that they can maintain those rental units out on the market. Some huge movement on broadband. I loved being able to talk about broadband, having been on the Public Works Committee for so many years, as Anacortes was truly a pioneer in that arena, and proud to be able to help have been a good advocate for the PUDs and others to be able to now have retail authority to help us reach some of the hardest to serve rural areas of our communities. As far as just localized projects, we were able to put money into the capital budget for the Gwalach Wellness Center for the infrastructure that is necessary at the Guimas ferry dock in order to continue with the project to electrify their ferry. Additional funds for the ferry itself went into the transportation budget. Speaking of the transportation budget, we also fought really hard to get the Commercial Avenue Highway 20 pavement project on the list. So yeah, so we're getting there. It's not the whole bit of money, but we got a good chunk of the way there, and we'll continue to work on that. And I was really pleased to be joined this year by Rep. Rammel. I chair the Ferry Legislator Caucus in the Senate and work with Representative Paul in the House, and Rep. Rammel has been instrumental in trying to form a more robust capitalization plan for our vessels. Because one thing I'm sure you hear is not only protecting the city run, but I know that just domestic service and that backlog that we tend to get in the San Juans during the summer months is really challenging for our community. So continuing to make sure we're getting boats built and that we have great service for people to use. Additionally, I want to give a little shout out to our staff. Jordan, Amanda, and Kaylee, who staff the 40th District offices, are just pretty darn amazing. And most of you have maybe had the opportunity to speak with them. But I just want to lift them up for a moment, because between the three of them, they elevated hundreds of unemployment cases over the course of this last year. People who had really challenging unemployment scenarios to work out, that really needed to have somebody come in and intervene on their claims to get either back pay or resolve something that was a particularly challenging application. And I just really want to give them a shout, because I've been stopped personally by people at the grocery store to just say how much they appreciate that our staff not only came and rose to that challenge to help them navigate what was obviously a tremendously challenging time for the Employment Security Department, just generally speaking, but also to just make sure that there was somebody compassionate to answer the phone and help people deal with their needs. Huge things around worker safety, environment, et cetera, but I'll just put a pin in it at that and open it up for questions.
I might run through just a couple of other policy priorities as well. Just want to highlight, Mayor, last fall, you provided some feedback on Rep. Paulette's proposal for local government spending flexibility. And that bill did end up passing. It was 1069. And that provides for the next couple of years a little additional flexibility in the criminal justice sales tax, as well as the mental health sales tax and the real estate excise taxes. Just with an eye to helping local governments be a little more nimble as we come out of this economic downturn. Another thing that we've heard over and over in talking with, in particular, small businesses and folks is the desperate need for additional childcare, especially in Anacortes. And this year we passed the Fair Start for Kids Act that's intended to make childcare work for more people. To make it more affordable for families, but also to make it a working business proposition where you can pay people to do a good job and pay them what they're worth, and still be able to manage a successful business. So it subsidizes and improves the subsidy of the rates, family co-pays, and provides other business supports. On clean energy, we passed some major climate legislation, and I guess the thing I'd really emphasize there is, in my mind, the importance of the low carbon fuel standard. You know, this corner of Washington has most of the oil refining in the Pacific Northwest. And I think sometimes when folks think about the clean energy future, there's a little bit of worry about what will happen to those businesses, those jobs. And in my mind, a low carbon fuel standard is a commitment to be producing clean fuels in Washington in the future, and really is a story that we should be proud to tell about how, you know, there's going to be liquid fuels for our transportation needs for years and years to come. And we've got an opportunity to make investments in making those fuels clean and making them here in Washington State. Wants to talk about on housing affordability, but would just love to flag for you all the changes in the multifamily tax exemption. And we sought a little bit of advice on this from you all last year, and the bill has now been enacted. We've significantly reformed that existing program. I know Anacortes has played around with using that policy in the past, and it hasn't been something that's been attractive to developers, but would love to explore whether there's a way to make it work with some of the changes that have just been made. And the last thing I'll emphasize is just a relatively small change, but I think it's an important one for this community. House Bill 1502 allows for local governments that are buying ferries to deviate from the low bid system. There's not a lot of producers of ferries, and it's particularly electric ferries, and it's important to make sure that the process leads to somebody you know you're going to be able to work with. So that was a priority for this community, and proud to report that that bill succeeded. So wrap up there, and happy to respond to questions. Thanks again for the time.
Yeah, just a quick note on that one. Like, that was one that we thought for sure was dead in the Senate for a minute there, and kind of came to life at the last minute. And it just kind of speaks to the pressures and challenges of trying to get all of this work done in a very constrained time frame. How bills that, like, that wasn't my bill that I worked on, but then at the end it became my responsibility. So, you know, a lot of things that we do end up, you know, you're pinch hitting at the last minute to get something through that's really important. Like, we had one that had to do with the licensure fees on whale watching vessels, which then ended up through a weird snafu with Department of Fish and Wildlife, also applying to kayak businesses, where they were going to have to pay a per kayak fee that was commensurate with what a whale watching vessel would pay. So that was another one where we had to figure out how to get things out of committees at the 11th hour to make sure that we were, going home with policies that needed to be taken care of. And then I just want to make one more comment globally, since you are all here in this virtual setting. We're one of the only legislatures in the country that didn't have a COVID outbreak. And that was because as a legislature, we made that decision very early on that we were just going to transition to a fully virtual environment. And while that made a lot of people nervous about how it was going to work and how we were going to be able to communicate, one of the greatest things that has come out of that was thousands more people were able to participate in committee hearings and were able to testify. I remember as a council member going down to Olympia to testify, and there you are, you're spending your entire day to go down and have 1 minute worth of commentary on a bill. And I think this is a fantastic change to make for democracy, to make sure that more and more people have the ability to participate. And so I hope that that's something that we continue to do.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Alex and Liz. Council, do you have questions of our?
Yes, Mayor
Yes,
Gear.
Mr. Young, go ahead.
No, I just really wanted to take this opportunity to thank Representative Ramos, Senator Loveland, Representative Luckenow. I had the pleasure of working rather robustly with their staff. We were working on behalf of Island Hospital to addressing their lack of COVID vaccinations. And so I reached out to them, and in 45 minutes, we had all three representative staff together. We coordinated a meeting with Island's CEO, Chief Operating Officer as well. And we were able to work out a plan of action to execute for our area, because it was almost a month that we had not received any of the COVID vaccination, any of the stuff to help us with our COVID trials here we were having. But your staff were superb. You rallied. It was beautiful. The results were clear. Island Hospital was able to get the vaccinations and somehow get back in the queue. And so I'm very thankful for that. And I just really want to commend you on the staff that you have, as well as your commitment to this area. So thank you very much.
We really couldn't do what we do without getting the feedback from you guys on the ground, because there's just so many things to keep track of all the time. And of course, Alex is up in Bellingham and Deborah's out in Bow, and we're trying to cover the islands and everything in between. And so the fact that we have really strong relationships all across the board, I think is one of the just brilliant blessings we have in this district, that not only does our legislative delegation get along well and our staff, but also that we have these really deep relationships that span throughout the district to make sure we really are delivering on those priorities.
That was made clear by just how flowing all of the staff was working together, and that in telling one, all three already knew when they came to the meeting. So bravo, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Well, you rendered us speechless. Thank you for all your good work. And no one has a question.
I'd love to do a close. I'm sure we'd both do a closing statement, though. If we
go ahead, do a closing statement.
Okay, just back to those relationships. The interim is the time where we really actually get to dig deep on things. By the time we get to session, things are in just full tilt. We're running fast. A lot of the policy has already been cooked and ready to go, or partially cooked, a pre-bake as it were. But we love being able to meet with y'all during the interim, and this goes out to the community too. That is the time when we can really dig in, figure out how we can problem solve together, and really work on all of these issues moving forward. I'll personally be working on GMA reform, land use issues, and a couple of other items over the interim. I know Rep. Rammel has a suite or portfolio of work to do. And then there's also monitoring implementation. With some of these big bills like the Low Carbon Fuel Standard and the Climate Commitment Act, we really want to be at the table to make sure that as they're implemented, that they're not only following the spirit of the law, but that we're not having unintended consequences. And so we just want to really make sure that you guys stay engaged throughout the year to bring issues to us, find out ways we can be helpful and collaborative, and continue that advocacy that we do so well together.
Thank you, Liz.
I would just echo what Senator Webwood said. I mean, I think the Councilmember Young's example is how I like to work, making sure that, you know, like there wasn't an issue that was on our radar, and as soon as we get the opportunity, as soon as we learn about it, it for me became a priority. And even though there's not a bill that we could write to fix that, our offices have the ability to convene a meeting and get attention of people who are making decisions. And even if we can't compel the decisions, we often have the ability to at least get the ear at the right moment. And at least in my mind, the purpose of this job is to be able to use that power to benefit folks in the community, and that includes all of you. So please feel free to reach out at any time that we can do that and help connect with state agencies that maybe just need to be made aware of a detail or two in the community. I think that's an important part of this job, and it's kind of often overlooked, but it's a lot of how I intend to spend my time in doing this work.
Well, thank you. I, for one, really appreciate how proactive you both are. So thank you from the city of Anacortes. Okay, any other questions? Well, thank you all. Thanks for being here. You can hang out with the rest of the night if you'd like. And we're going on now to our next agenda item, which is agenda item 5B. This is resolution 3028, updating the work plan adopted in resolution 3005 regarding the bonus height provision in the R4 zone, west of commercial zone related to ordinance 3088. Would you explain all that, Don, please?
Yes, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council and the audience. So Resolution 3028 updates the work plan, as the Mayor mentioned, under Resolution 2068 regarding the bonus height provisions allowed by our newly adopted zoning regulations in the R4 use zone west of the commercial use zone. And that's related to Ordinance 3088, which extended the moratorium currently in place until October 12, 2021, to allow work with the community on various concepts to move forward with the Planning Commission. So our first step in this process will be for us to come to the to the City Council with a public meeting on several concepts that were brought forward during a workshop last year. And those concepts include maybe step backs in the building as it gets taller, maybe more setback at the ground level, more open space, maybe not going any further than O Avenue with the bonus height provision. So the bonus height provisions apply to, you're allowed to go an extra 10 feet beyond the 40-foot base height in that district if your units are no larger than 600 square feet. That's the portion of this code section that is under moratorium. If you're building affordable units, you can still get that bonus height. So staff would like to begin that process in June 2021, and then move through June, July, get those draft concepts to the Planning Commission for public hearings in July, and then get some recommendations from the Planning Commission and back into City Council in August, and hopefully finish up in September. So that's a rather brief presentation, but I think covers it all. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. Otherwise, staff recommends approval of Resolution 3028.
Mayor Gear.
Mr. Walters.
Mr. Meismer, this timeline looks doable. I know we've had it slide a couple of times, but I'm eager to get this issue done, dealt with, and move on to other things. The concepts that come out, I know we haven't reviewed the concepts yet, so we don't know what the proposal is, so we can't have a public comment period yet. But I do think it would be useful if we articulate it in these schedules. Just as a general matter, I'm not proposing that we change it now, but that we articulate in these schedules about when the comment period will be, so that we're approving that as well. I expect that you'll be proposing at least a 2-week comment period. Do you expect more than that?
I expect that we could possibly have a comment period before the Planning Commission and before the City Council.
Do you mean 2 comment periods?
Correct.
Okay, so I think that's desirable. I think it's also desirable to have as lengthy a comment period within reason as we can fit between the date that you go out for public review and the date of the public hearing. Like we altered on the critical areas ordinance, so that there's a lengthy period.
Agreed.
And there's no gap between the close the comment period and the public hearing.
Correct.
Okay, great.
I think that's doable.
Mayor Gear.
And we're ready to get this done as well.
Yes, Mr. McDougall? Is that
Miller.
Miller?
Yeah, I think the timeline's fine. And if you could maybe refresh me on how, I appreciate the fact you talked about step backs and no avenue and some of the different concepts, how we're going to get the information. Yeah, I just don't want to have the first meeting and we haven't gotten those draft or those draft concepts out to the public. How are we going to at least get those out there before that meeting? What's the plan there?
A very good question, Mr. Miller. Thank you. So my thought is that since we already have a few draft concepts, was to have a public meeting with the City Council and get those concepts somewhat flushed out a little bit better. Once we have that flushed out, then have a public meeting with the Planning Commission and get them out again to the public before a public hearing.
Yeah, that seems great. Maybe even another idea is send it out to the council and, we can drum up, especially from some of the citizens that have come to us with concerns and see what other concepts that might be workable. But I think that all sounds good. I like the plan.
Thank you.
Comments? Okay, what is your pleasure?
Mayor Gear,
Mr. Young?
I move to adopt resolution 3028, updating the work plan for the Bonus Heights provision in R4 zone west of commercial zone.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Mr. Young, a second by Mr. Walters. Are there any additional comments? Ms. Hunt, would you take the vote?
Mr. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Walters,
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath,
Yes.
Ms. Moulton,
Yes.
Mr. McDougall,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
motion carries.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to item 5C. This is our Access Anacortes Fiber Internet update. This is a discussion item. Ms. Shu.
Good evening, Mayor and Council and members of the audience. I'm pleased to be able to present the monthly update to City Council. As I was thinking about it, last month we moved from our usual spot in the third week to the fourth week, so it hasn't been quite as long since we last met. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Sorry. Things that we'll be talking about are probably familiar to you now, but as we look at our GPON customers, one of the things I would like to just point out is that we have 720 customers in service as of this afternoon, bringing in a monthly revenue of over $47,000. I like this chart just because it shows the growth month over month and the speed of which the installations have occurred from a year ago. Just to
Yes, Mr. Walters.
Sorry, before you get too far along there, the last slide, the chart definitely indicates that there's been a slowdown in the last month and addition of customers in service is I mean, I could guess at some of the explanation, but can you provide that?
One of the things that I would point out is that last time we met was just the last week in April, as opposed to the third week in April. So there was one less week during the time frame that we're looking at. We also spent the good part of 1 week doing both the construction and the installation at 24th Court, which ended up putting 4 customers in service, but was a significant amount of time in doing that work. And it's probably a good indication and a good thing for us to consider that as we move towards more of our installations becoming underground, that the rate of installations will likely decrease just with the amount of work that's involved with each of those installations.
And that's what I imagined. I think the 1 week difference is significant, but still it's a much smaller number. So do I assume then that we should expect that much slower rate going forward? Or do we think we can pick it up from here?
I think it's going to be a combination of both, that in the areas that we currently have in service, that we are systematically still working through some of the aerial installations that are in queue. And we also are working towards the underground installations that initially we were kind of holding off for some of the easier installations as we were really working to increase the number of orders. Now we're doing everybody in our current service area. Right now, we're also putting a big focus on the businesses in the current service area that have orders placed. So I'm not trying to skirt the question. As we've been looking at it, we do foresee that we're probably going to be looking at about 2 installations per day if we're only doing underground installations. And I will be coming back and talking to the personnel committee and the finance committee, or excuse me, the fiber committee. We've had some internal conversations about what it would look like if we were to bring on some additional staff that will allow us to have 2 full installation teams, which is a team of 3, to continue to increase the rate of installations.
You're supportive of whatever we can do there.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So this is again a report that you're accustomed to seeing, but we actually, with the number of signups, and they do continue to increase. Today we met a 30% market share in our current service area. We've really been working towards having at least a 35%. Because all of our business planning said that is the point where this makes it a viable option for us. So I really thought that was significant when we moved to 36% market share in our current service areas.
Mayor Gary.
Mr. McDougall.
Monsieur, if you wouldn't mind going back to that last slide, I did a little bit of quick math compared to the original model as well, where the original model projected a certain amount of monthly revenue per user as kind of the blend, between the 100 megabit and the 1 gigabit. And it projected it at about $47 per user per month. And we're right now riding just below $54 per customer per month. So we're also sort of beating the model on the revenue side as well. Both good things that we're there on kind of market share and revenue, because construction, it looks like, is going to also be a bit higher as well.
Thank you for pointing that out. This is our monthly cash flow that we incorporated into our discussion last month. And in regard to the revenue, probably the biggest thing to look at is our internet revenue. That is the largest item. And again, you can see the significant growth month over month for that. Our installation charges are one-time charges that are coming in. And there are times when we are doing ad hoc projects where there's a specific agreement in place where there's additional amount of that construction cost that is covered. that is why you see in March the $20,000 that was with some work that we did for the Port of Anacortes. I would point out that our installation technicians, that the majority or about half of their time, and probably more than that, is included in the construction expenses. And that, as you can see, that our operating cash flow is still negative, but we are doing everything we can to move that toward getting our operating cash flow to break even by increasing the number of services that we have in order, the orders that we have in service. We did take our first draw on the line of credit in April for $306,905. And we do expect to take additional draws this year. The finance department is working closely with us with those decisions. In our current service area, and I know everything in green on this map are our current service areas, we still have 133 orders in queue for service, and those continue to grow. Just over the weekend, we had an additional 7 orders that came in. The A Town is Our Town publication will be going out this week, which again, we tend to see an uptick in orders as those go out and people learn more and more about our services. I'm going to talk a little bit about the American Recovery Plan Act. The Treasury Department sent out their interim final rules on May 10th. It was over 150 pages long, but I wanted to just highlight a couple items from that. And again, it wasn't all related to broadband, but there are some things here that I think that are very encouraging for the city of Anacortes. No longer are we only seeing the words unserved for areas that are considered eligible for funding. So they're also talking about underserved. And that is if there's even one person who lacks 25/3 service in a geographical area. It's also gone away from the idea that if you have 25/3 service, that is what we should be working toward. And so they're saying that even though 100 megabits per second is the speed necessary, we really should be looking at something greater than that. And what I really loved was the section that said that the guidance that it encourages the support for broadband networks that are owned and operated or affiliated with local governments. Because what we've been saying all along is that we have less pressure to turn profits because we have a commitment and a longer term investment. So there are some things that were really encouraging about these interim final rules, and we have already reached out and have requests in through the Washington State Broadband Office for funding, and have encouraged them to come to the city of Anacortes and see the good work that we're doing here. And we want a piece of that funding. So in terms of our network expansion, we basically have 4 areas to get us through to build out for the entire city of Anacortes. One is the west end, which basically is west of Anacopper Mine Road, where we will be passing 2,375 premises. If you think about it, we're a little over we're into our 3rd year now of running this program, where we have 2,300 premises that we've passed in those 2.25 years. We're now in 1 year going to be passing another 2,375. So that is a great expansion that we are going to be able to offer service in a much larger area. That design work is complete. The contract, it has been established and signed by council. And tomorrow we're actually meeting with an all-day meeting with the contractors and NOAANET to have a pre-construction meeting with them in place. So they'll be here in town. The funding source for that is the Savvy Bank line of credit. And we have submitted this phase for funding through ARPA, and that is being administered through the Washington State Broadband Office. In 2021, we will be also working towards the east of A Avenue, kind of backfilling our current service area. And that was work that we originally thought we would be doing this year. But when we gained the EDA grant funding through the Economic Development Administration that is helping to offset $2.25 million of that project, there are several steps that we needed to go through, and it became clear that it was just going to be a longer process. And so that's why we moved towards the west end for our project this year. That design work will begin this year and will be followed by construction and installations in 2022.
Mayor Gear,
Yes, Mr. Google.
Michoud, have you gotten any guidance from the Washington State Broadband Office on when we might hear back from them, or guidance on even like a visit?
So originally, what they have shared with us is that they were waiting for the Treasury's interim rulemaking that was released last Monday. And so we followed up again with them at the end of late last week, just saying, we have this great project, please come see us, or we can arrange a way to connect with you so you can see what we're doing here. When they were in the process of trying to put together the different projects, they did ask, what do you have that is shovel ready and would be something that you could have done by 2024. And so we included the east of A Avenue and, the west end of Anacortes Mine Road, the work that we're doing this year, and east of Anacortes to A Avenue we included. So we put in a request for close to 9.5 or $9.7 million of that funding, just kind of putting it out there and making those requests. So our understanding that this is much less like a grant in the many steps that we're going through with the EDA, and more of a show me your project, and we want to be able to support that.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're definitely shovel ready, so thank you.
Thanks. And then we just put out as a to be determined the urban growth area along Highway 20 and Marsh's Point for 2023 to 2024. We do have that area that there's a small section between Anacortes and A Avenue that has 875 premises. That will be one little section that we'll have remaining, but we have put that in through ARPA. So in pictures, that this is what this looks like. Here's our current service area. Again, we have 2,273 potential customers. When you add in this year's expansion, we're doubling our network size in 1 year with that expansion out into the west end. So feeling good about that we'll have about, I think it was 76% of our potential properties served or be passed by the end of 2020.
Mayor Gear.
Mr. Walters.
Given that we're halfway through 2021 now, and that area proposed to be served is half again, or it is the same size or larger than the area we're already serving, is it realistic to say that we will be hitting those during 2021?
The construction is certainly going to be done this year. I do think that the actual installations will take us into next year to complete. We have just under 500 orders in those areas. As we're looking at kind of worst case scenario, 2 installations a day, that could take us a long time to complete. We are hopeful that there will be support for additional staffing, which would allow us to increase those daily installations to 4. So we would be doing on average about 20 a week or 80 a month. And that gets us through all of those orders and ones that come in about 6 months as opposed to a year.
And having observed the amount of work that needs to go into the underground installations, sure seems like if you are able to fill in gaps in those schedules with overhead installations elsewhere in the city, that could be a really good use of staff, really efficient use of staff, especially if you had more staff.
And we'll quickly run out of the overheads to backfill in those areas. Because it's really just in these green areas in our current service areas that are aerial installation areas.
I do expect that we'll continue to get more customers in existing areas as the word continues to spread, though.
I think that there are a lot of reasons why it would be beneficial for us to increase the staff and increase the rate of which we can bring people into service.
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Young.
No, I just wanted to comment, you know, how much I appreciate this and also how much I am looking forward to the day that I can get service too. And, I'm holding out. Yeah, I know we're coming and I know that you're going as fast as you can, as efficiently as you can. I will point out though that I am, as I'm sure others are, getting a barrage of calls from our competitors trying to offer services at this point. And I've noticed that it has increased. So I'm sure you guys are considering all of this, but I would be for more marketing, just to simply say, hey, we're coming, hang on for our local service. It will be far better than anything else you may get. However you may do that, I think that will be important at this point too. Thank you.
Thank you for that feedback.
Mayor Gear?
Yes, Ms. Walton.
Thank you. Ms. Chu, I just want to sort of piggyback on that comment. I've had a neighbor tell me that they were approached by a company claiming to represent the city or be working for the city. And there was some confusing communication. So maybe this is a good time to also alert our citizens that they want to be sure that it actually is the city of Anacortes if they have any question at all. And so I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. And so when we are in an area, our staff work very hard to have like sandwich boards. They're wearing clothing that identifies them as a city employee. But before our construction crews are going out into the West End, we're going to be putting information out so people will know that they're there working on behalf of the city. But yes, I do understand that there is some confusion. We have spoken with the competitor and just asked them to please ensure that their representatives are being truthful in terms of how they're doing their marketing, and that we do have separate networks and we're not sharing the same fiber. And I think that there's been some misinformation that's been going out. So we have been having conversations about that. So in 2023, there's a gray area that's on the slide. That will be the remaining area where we'll pass another 872 premises that will help complete our network within the city of Anacortes limits. And then we'll be working with council to see how and if it makes sense to expand outside the city of Anacortes. We do know that we have this commercial growth area along Highway 20. We have been working on some special projects. We're continuing to work on the Senior Activity Center. We'll be replacing their wireless connectivity and fiber will be extended to that building. I will mention just as a kind of side conversation that as we were doing the procurement of the materials, there was an actual straight face conversation that said that we could have those materials to you in 2024. So there is a lot of pressure on the manufacturers to keep up with this funding that has become available for broadband. And so I just am very appreciative of Mr. Lundberg's resourcefulness in looking at and finding other resources and having lots of different conversations and networks to ensure that we are not being held up because of some equipment that won't be available till 2024. But it is something that we're certainly taking into consideration as we're doing our expansion so that we can ensure that we have the materials. And it will probably become more and more challenging. We are working towards the Rock Island Communications, 2 separate leases, one between Anacortes and Mount Vernon, and then a separate dark fiber lease that will be within the city of Anacortes. Wave has requested a dark fiber lease from Anacortes to the water treatment plant. We are looking forward to serving Western Washington University at Shannon Point Marine Center with a dedicated internet access once that network is built. And there's an additional site that Island Hospital has shared with us that they intend to add a dark fiber lease to when that is up and running. So just a coming activity, the EDA grant application continues to be processed. We have a cultural resources study that's currently underway, and they'll be on site doing some pit digs this week. We are finalizing easements with the West End homeowner associations and different property owners, and our appreciation to Darcy Swetnam for the very helpful work that she has provided in that and ensuring that we have that all in place with the private streets there. We are seeking ARPA grant funding and continue to follow the infrastructure bill, which is separate from the ARPA funding, but is also has a large focus on broadband expansion. So we continue to ask in your help in trying to get the word out about Access Anacortes Fiber Internet. We want to be the internet service provider of choice for our community. Our rates are very reasonable. We do not have just starter fees that then change over time. We do a one-time installation fee of $100. And I really just feel like there's just no gimmicks with our plan. You pick up the phone and you talk to somebody local. If you're unhappy with the service, you can talk with us. And we're not getting those calls, but you could also, go directly to the city council. This is something that our community owns and manages, and we want to continue to be the place that people come to in terms of seeking out that service. So we have a lot of experience we have experience under our belt now with the past year, and I think we just continue to get better and better at this. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, well, thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
Good report. All right, got everything? So this time, we will go to the final item on our agenda this evening, which is item 5D. It is open for public comment. It is our wastewater treatment plant solids handling report. Mr. Buckemeyer, would you introduce our guests this evening?
Thank you, Mayor. Council, let me put my stuff on here. Okay. Solids waste handling. So kind of an update before we introduce folks, kind of an update on the process where we're at. As some of you know, or maybe most of you, we've accelerated our selection process a bit. And normally I start off by saying, what the problem is we're trying to solve. In this case, it's an opportunity we're trying to take advantage of, and that's a funding opportunity. So the hydrothermic process is gaining popularity with regulatory agencies around the nation. And in fact, it's resulting in some large, unexpected funding opportunities, but they're coming up fast, and we have to do kind of a quick reaction if this is the way we want to go. The turnaround is pretty quickly. It's less than a month, and there's a large application process, about 150 pages. So we got to get moving again if this is the way that the mayor and city council want to go. So Brown and Caldwell, the folks are here tonight. They're going to present that universe of options that we've been promised you folks. They've got about a 30-minute presentation, and then as much time as we want for questions and answers after that. So these folks have taken the opportunity to look at our plant from kind of a high level, if you will, and made some fatal flaw decisions. Like some things just aren't going to work here. One of the ones that Mayor Gear was asking me about, which is how does that work? I said, well, as you're driving to Everett and you see these big lakes beside the freeway, we don't have room for a big lake. So rather than spend a whole lot of time evaluating that, you know, we sort of made a call thinking you wouldn't want to buy up something and build a lake. So that's narrowed our field a bit. They've also taken a look at some technology things from their level of expertise and made some ranking decisions based on that. But we're still going to go over each option, including the lakes, tonight with you, just to make sure it's a level playing field and you know where everybody was coming from. So what we also did at the Public Works Committee this evening is we applied committee weighting criteria. So we had the same chance that they had to kind of throw our, you know, what was important to us, what was important to the committee out there. And they didn't, the Brown and Caldwell folks didn't know the results of that until this evening. So we didn't want to, like, you know, somehow slant this thing. So they didn't have any idea what we were going to come up with. We threw our numbers into the mix, and it altered some of the rankings. Some of the projects were altered, you know, a little bit because of that. So that's good. So what we want to do tonight, go through this thing, hopefully narrow this down to 3 or 2 or maybe even 1, and then, you know, give us a head nod really on is it okay to, you know, to apply for this funding opportunity that's coming up. Again, I want to just say it, I don't know how to say it enough times. If this is what the mayor and city council want to do, there's no pressure at all. If you decide, you know, we're going to take some more time to think about this, we can come back at this thing next year. You know, it's not, you know, it's not an eminent thing. It's you know, we're going to keep that incinerator running as you know, as long as we can. I did share with the committee that we're going to be spending an unexpected $500,000 here sometime this year on new. Some things are failing on the incinerator that we just put on there 2 years ago, so we'll be in there fixing them again. But with that, I thought I would hand it over to Rick. I think Rick Kelly's going to be the one kind of introducing his team. But yeah, anyway, with that, take it away, buddy.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to thank you all for the opportunity to speak to everyone this evening. We are going to go through the study that we did on solids handling options for the city of Anacortes. I'm joined tonight by Brinley Finzel. She's a mechanical engineer in our Seattle office, and by John Willis. He's our subject matter expert on solids treatment options. He's in our Atlanta office. I'm Rick Kelly. I'm a senior process engineer in the Seattle office. So Brinley, if you don't mind bringing up the presentation, and we'll start to run through this. Okay, so the agenda that we're going to talk through on this presentation, first we're going to give a brief overview of the wastewater treatment plant. Then we're going to discuss what are other systems in Washington State doing, both with their solids that they generate and those systems that specifically use incineration. Then we're going to go through the kind of summary scoring of the technologies just to introduce the topic, and then present those that we deemed fatally flawed, just so you have an idea of why. Then we'll run through a bit of an overview on each technology, summary of what they are, the pros and cons, and then finish up with the scoring criteria that were developed for this, and the actual scores applied to the technologies, and then end with kind of where do we go from here? What are the next steps of this project? So your treatment plant, it's a primary and a secondary treatment facility. Primary being they remove some solids by gravity up front, and then the remainder of the wastewater flows through secondary treatment where it's biologically treated to clean up the water to a high quality effluent for discharge. Your capacity is about 4.5 MGD. You average about 2 MGD. That's million gallons a day of treated flow. The solids treatment that you have right now is a fluidized bed incinerator. We're going to probably abbreviate that as an FBI or maybe just an incinerator later through this presentation. It is getting close to the end of its useful life. We typically consider a useful life on an incinerator of somewhere between 20 and 30 years before they either need major rehabilitation or replacement. You have had some recent issues, especially around air permitting and meeting the air permit requirements for the incinerator. It does require diesel fuel, both to start up the system, to get it running, and then it does require some supplemental diesel fuel to actually continue to burn the solids that you're trying to convert to an ash product. In the end, it does not really provide any useful products. It consumes diesel fuel and it produces ash, which has to be landfilled, but you are not getting any beneficial use products. No soil supplements that you can land apply, no fuels like natural gas or biodiesel that can be generated from this process. So what's the rest of Washington doing? About 2/3 of Washington state land applies. They produce solids that are capable of land application. About 20%, 18% is actually doing incineration. All of the waste from incinerators is landfilled. There are about 11% that still do some landfilling, and then a little bit of other surface disposal options, but that's a very small fraction in Washington state. As far as Western Washington is concerned, there are 5 incinerators for municipal wastewater treatment in Western Washington: Bellingham, Anacortes, Linwood, Edmonds, and Vancouver, Washington. Of these 5, 2 of them are already in the process of converting to a different solids disposal technology. Bellingham converting to temperature-phased anaerobic digestion, TPAD, and Edmonds converting to a gasification system. Linwood and Vancouver are not planning on any changes right now. And of course, your facility is potentially considering a change. I will say that all of the plants that have incinerators in Western Washington are having issues meeting stringent air permits. So that's a major concern for all of these facilities. Now, as Fred had mentioned, we looked at a number of different technologies here. Call it the world of options or the universe of options, whatever you want to call it. But we ranked a large number of technologies based on a series of scoring criteria that were developed specifically to address concerns of the city surrounding a solids treatment technology. And this is excluding those that were fatally flawed. This is the final ranking of the raw scores. This does not include any of the weighting that was developed by the Public Works Committee. In this, we looked at the hydrothermal liquefaction that was introduced earlier, as well as Class A temperature-phased anaerobic digestion, Class B mesophilic anaerobic digestion, raw solids composting, digestion with drying, adding dryers, aerobic digestion, alkaline stabilization, autothermal aerobic digestion, gasification, pyrolysis, the fluidized bed incinerator, and supercritical water oxidation. It's another advanced technology. So these are the scores as they came out, raw, and we'll talk through that a bit later. There were a few more technologies that were evaluated that we were deemed fatally flawed during this analysis. The first of which was thermal hydrolysis. This is a way of improving digestion performance. The fatal flaw there is it's just not available small enough. The smallest facility, or the smallest that they can handle of a facility for the equipment that they have, is a 20 MGD facility. So it's about 10 times larger than your system. Lagoons, that's what Everett and Marysville use. They were deemed fatally flawed. Two reasons: one was footprint, and the second is permitting. It's very difficult to get a new lagoon permitted through the Department of Ecology right now. Raw solids drying, this is taking the primary sludge, mixing it with the waste sludge from the secondary process and drying it, driving off all the liquid. We deem this fatally flawed because the primary solids, specifically what we consider the raw solids, is it's flammable, so it does have a tendency to catch on fire in dryers. The biosolids end product, while it does meet Class A standards, it's very odorous when it gets re-wet. So finding a market for that, or a land disposal site for it, is quite difficult. Most people don't want it because of the odors generated when it gets rained on, and makes it very difficult to sell. And then lastly, there is a lot of grease and other things in those raw solids that can actually make it, kind of gunk up the equipment, make it very maintenance intensive. There is another raw solids dryer that adds on vapor extraction and distillation. That is a process that's produced by, it used to be Janicki Bioenergy. It's now Sedron out of Sedro-Woolley. Along with the problems of raw solids drying, it also cannot be scaled down to the Anacortes capacity. And then the last technology, which has been in the news, is the Janicki Omni processor, also from Sedron Technologies in Sedro-Woolley. That is a filtration distillation with incineration and energy generation. It's a very advanced piece of equipment, but they cannot meet U.S. air permitting, and they do not have any plans on trying to market in the U.S. So that's the end of the introduction. I'm going to turn it over and allow Bryn Lee to talk to you about the different technologies.
Thanks, Rick. And I'm going to go through all of them except for the fatally flawed ones that Rick just covered. So I did try to keep everything at pretty high level. But some of the technologies are just pretty complex. So if you have any questions, feel free to stop me at any time. I will try to define as much as I can as I go through it, but if I miss anything or if you want further explanation, again, feel free to ask. I do have all the slides in the order that they were ranked. So we're going to start with the highest ranking technology and then go down to the lowest. So starting with hydrothermal liquefaction, this is a process that converts the sludge under high pressures and temperatures to create a crude oil and biogas. I might use biomass or sludge or solids, or they're all kind of interchangeable terms for the solids product that we're putting into all these systems. The biogas is similar to like a methane natural gas, and many processes produce that. So we'll be talking about biogas a lot here. Some of the pros for hydrothermal liquefaction is that there are funding opportunities. It does have a usable end product. There is higher net energy production compared to all the digestion options we're going to look at. Depending on how you use the gas, it can have negative greenhouse gas emissions, which I've shortened in this presentation to GHG. It does have a small footprint, and there are opportunities to co-process other wastes into your system. So you could get waste from other places in the city and treat it in your HTL system to create more crude oil. The cons are that there are no full-scale installations. There are a couple pilots that are of similar size to Anacortes, but nothing at full scale yet. The oil produced does require further treatment and would have to be sent to a refinery for processing. It does have, we're assuming it has high O&M costs since there isn't a full installation. That one's a little uncertain. And then it will require specialized training for the plant operators and will have a moderate capital cost. Class A temperature phased anaerobic digestion, or TPAD, is a two-step digestion process. The first step is a digester at higher temperatures, followed by a mesophilic digestion at slightly lower temperatures to produce a Class A biosolids and biogas. The Class A biosolids is a classification assigned by EPA. So there's Class A and there's Class B. Class A is a little more stringent, but you have more options of what you can do with it. I think the actual EPA website says it's suitable for public land, agriculture. There's just a little more options, whereas Class B, you're more limited to just agriculture. So the pros here are that it's an established technology, it has usable end products. Depending on how you use the gas, it can have negative greenhouse gas emissions. And then it does have lower O&M costs compared to mesophilic digestion. Cons are that it has a large footprint. It is the fourth largest biosolids production by volume. And then that does have fees associated with it for land application. We tried to compare the biosolids production compared to the other digestion options, and then also compared it to the ash produced by the current incinerator. So as we go through the other digestion options, you'll see the second largest biosolids production. And then it does have high capital cost and then a little more maintenance than mesophilic digestion. So here is our Class B mesophilic anaerobic digestion. It's a biological process to stabilize and reduce the sludge to produce a Class B biosolids product. And it does produce biogas. Pros are that it's very established. I think it's one of the most common solids treatment processes at treatment plants. And it is a favored technology by Ecology. It has usable end products, low O&M, and possible negative greenhouse gas emissions. The cons are that it has a high capital cost. It's the third largest biosolids production of volume with costs for transporting it off-site. And then the use, you are able to use the biogas, but it does require treatment and upgrading, which just adds another level of complexity. It has a large footprint, and it is susceptible to biological upset. So just like us, we get upset stomachs, so do the digesters. Raw solids composting is similar to composting at home with your food or yard waste. So you decompose the sludge to produce Class A biosolids. The pros are that it's low capital costs, moderate energy use. You can co-dispose other yard waste. So you could get yard waste from the city of Anacortes residents and process it at your composting site. And then it does produce a usable end product. The cons are that there's no energy byproduct, so there's no biogas that you could use beneficially. It is very stinky and maintenance intensive, and it does require additional feedstock to help that decomposition process. But then now you're adding volume and mass to your final product. So now you have more product to truck off-site. It does have the second largest footprint, second to lagoons, which Rick mentioned that was fatally flawed for that reason. And since you're most likely not able to put this on site at the treatment plant, you'll have to find an off-site location and then truck the solids to that off-site facility for processing. Mesophilic anaerobic digestion with drying is similar to the Class B anaerobic digestion we already looked at, but this is paired with sludge drying. So after digestion, the sludge would go into a thermal dryer to produce a Class A biosolids. The pros are that you can use the biogas produced from the digester to operate the dryer, so you're using a third of the gas that you're producing in the system. It does have the smallest volume of biosolids of all of the other digestion options, and the final product is very high quality and fairly easy to sell. And the cons are that you do need a supplemental fuel requirement, because the digester gas can only provide so much energy, and then that supplemental fuel source does have significant greenhouse gas emissions. It does have high capital cost, O&M cost, and it requires a lot of maintenance similar to the current incinerator. And then it has a large footprint. Aerobic digestion is a little similar, but a little different. It uses oxygen-consuming microorganisms to stabilize the solids and destroy the harmful pathogens in the sludge to produce a Class B biosolids. The pros are that it's established and actually a favored technology at small treatment plants. It does have usable end products, and it often, it's most likely the lowest capital cost of all of the technologies we're looking at today. And then it also has a low maintenance cost. The cons are that it produces the largest amount of biosolids of all the digestion options. And it does have high energy consumption with no energy production. So you're not getting that biogas like out of the anaerobic digesters. It has a moderate footprint and high operational costs. Alkaline stabilization is a process of adding alkaline chemicals to the sludge to produce Class A or B biosolids. The pros are that it's low capital costs, you have a usable end product, low energy, and a short detention time. So from the time you get the sludge to the time you add the chemicals and then you have the final product is a pretty quick turnaround. The cons are that it has a large footprint and it is the largest volume of biosolids because you're adding this chemical, which then adds to the overall volume of the product rather than destroying like some of the other technologies do. It's very odorous. It requires a lot of chemicals, and the chemicals, the lime, can be very carbon intensive, which will impact the greenhouse gas emissions. It's very maintenance intensive and probably the highest operational cost of all of the technologies we're looking at. Autothermal aerobic digestion is similar to the other aerobic digestion, but now we're operating at higher temperatures. And then the microorganisms used can actually self-heat. And since you're at higher temperatures that are self-heating, you can actually have smaller digesters. And it does produce a Class A biosolids. The pros are that it's established technology, usable end product, a small footprint, low capital cost and maintenance costs. Cons are that the process itself is very odorous, and then the biosolids product is very odorous. And then sometimes hard to sell because they're so odorous. It does have the second largest quantity of biosolids produced. It has high energy consumption, greenhouse gas production, and operational costs. Gasification is a thermal decomposition process to oxidize in the sludge under high temperature substoichiometric conditions. This produces a biochar and a syngas. Essentially, you're heating up the sludge so high to produce this biochar and syngas. The biochar is similar to a charcoal or a coal, and then it's very valuable in agricultural applications because it acts as like a soil amendment and actually holds the nutrients in the soil. The pros are that there are possible funding opportunities. The biochar is of reportedly high value in the agricultural industry, and it does produce a small amount of material to dispose of. The cons are that there's only one installation at a wastewater treatment plant. This technology is more common at in other industries such as woodworking or logging and other ones, but not very common for wastewater treatment. It does require additional feedstock and drying for pretreatment, and then it will need specialized training for the operators. It is pretty complex and mechanically intensive, so it is a little more complex than the other technologies. And then the syngas produced is of little value. It can be reused in the system, but you can't do much else with it. Pyrolysis is similar to gasification, but it operates at lower temperatures and doesn't require oxygen. It does produce a biochar and syngas, but then it also produces a pie oil. The only differences in the pros and the cons are that the pie oil has little to no value, and you would basically have to send it to the landfill or burn it, but you can't do much with it. And then we have our fluidized bed incinerator. It uses sludge and diesel to burn the sludge and produce an ash. The pros are that it's an established technology. It is currently what the plant is using. It has the lowest waste solids production, which is the ash, and then it has a small footprint because it's already there. The cons are that an air permit is required, and I think the plant is having issues meeting the requirements. It is energy intensive, requires disposal of the ash. It has high greenhouse gas emissions, maintenance costs, and then it does require supplemental fuel. And then last but not least is supercritical water oxidation. This is similar to hydrothermal liquefaction, which is the first technology we looked at, except the pressures and temperatures are much higher and actually go beyond the thermodynamic critical point for water. And at this point, the water is at all three phases and destroys all of the harmful pathogens and oxidizes everything and produces ash and clean water. The pros are that there are possibly funding opportunities. It's a small footprint. It has low greenhouse gas emissions. Cons are that there's no known full-scale installation. There are a couple pilots. I know there's one at Duke University, and I was actually told if the city is interested, you could send a sample of your sludge to Duke, and then they would run your sludge through the process and then send you the data and the results. And then since there are no known full-scale installations, there's a lot of unknowns with the process, but we're assuming it's high capital cost and high energy use. And that was it.
Okay, thank you, Brinley. So we're going to now run through the technology scoring very briefly. The scoring criteria that were developed were grouped into 5 different categories. Reliability, in other words, how operationally complex is it? Is it hard to maintain? Is it easy to build? How much footprint does it take up? Does it impact other plant processes? And what's the status of the technology? Is it still at research scale, or is it established with hundreds of installations across the United States? The second category is cost. This is broken down into capital cost, operational and maintenance costs, funding opportunities available, and whether or not there's a product that can be used as a revenue potential. On the regulatory side, does it meet the EPA's biosolids classification for Class A or Class B? Does it require or impact your air permit? Some of these technologies do not require an air permit and some do. Does it impact your existing NPDES permit? That's your permit for discharging wastewater. And will it have an impact for N, being nitrogen limits? The Department of Ecology in Washington is currently in the process of establishing nitrogen limits for the treatment plants that discharge into the Puget Sound and the greater Salish Sea area right now. Then, of course, there's sustainability as scoring criteria. This could be how much biosolids is produced, whether or not the process produces or consumes energy, how much energy is consumed in the process, what does the greenhouse gas emissions spectrum look like? Is it heavy producer, light producer of greenhouse gas emissions? Can you reuse the biosolids or any of the products that are generated? And then can the system take supplemental feedstock? In this case, what we mean is, can you add an outside source to it, like restaurant grease or food waste? Some processes can take that and actually use those wastes to generate additional gas or oil products. And then there's public impacts, the social impacts, what's it going to do to rates or noise? And then one being very important that we wanted to break out from the standard social impacts was odor generation. How odorous is the product or the process itself, so that we don't cause too much of an impact for the residences and businesses in the area right there. So what we took was each one of these scoring criteria, and we applied a ranking of 1 to 5 for each one of the alternatives that were assessed for your facility, from the fluidized bin incinerator all the way to the supercritical water oxidation. Some of these could achieve the same ranking, but we applied a 1 to 5 scale, where 5 being most beneficial. In other words, if we're looking at technology status, a 5 means it's established, been around for years, installed at numerous facilities across the United States. Whereas if the technology status is a 1, it's still kind of at the research stage, hasn't even really fully developed into a pilot scale yet. In terms of cost, one thing to remember there, this is most beneficial is the highest number. So a 5 is actually the lowest cost. It's a little counterintuitive, but we wanted to apply a similar scoring criteria for everything there. So this is a little hard to read, so what we're going to do is break it down a little bit more for you for each one. And what we looked at here for the criteria, the lumped criteria of reliability, cost, regulatory, sustainability, and those public impacts. The fluidized bin incinerator had a reliability score of 24. Again, remember, the higher the score, it's more beneficial. The more reliable, the lower the maintenance, the less land it takes up. So it had a reliability score of 24, cost of 8, regulatory of 12. Again, higher score for regulatory means fewer hurdles to jump over on the regulatory side, fewer impacts for regulation. Sustainability was a 12, public impacts was an 8. Got a total score of about 64. So if we apply those criteria across all the options, as we did here, you get Class B Mesophilic digestion was a 75. Class A temperature phased anaerobic digestion, TPAD, was a 77. Aerobic digestion, which is very common for small treatment plants, was a 72. Autothermal aerobic digestion, of which there's very few in Washington State, what was a 69. Alkaline or lime stabilization, also a 69. Next slide. Raw solids composting, that was a 75 total score. Mesophilic digestion with dryers. Again, remember, only raw sludge dryers were fatally flawed. If you're applying it after digestion, it is still considered a good, reliable technology. That process received a 72. Gasification received a 69 score, pyrolysis a 68. Hydrothermal liquefaction, HTL, was a 78 score, and supercritical water oxidation, SCWO, was a 62 score. So the final rankings of everything, the top 4 technologies were hydrothermal liquefaction, Class A temperature phased anaerobic digestion, and then Class B Mesophilic anaerobic digestion, raw solids composting were tied at a 75 apiece. Again, this is the raw scores as they were applied. It didn't include any of the weighting that was developed by the Public Works Committee. Your fluidized bed incinerator came out near the bottom of the overall technology scoring. And that's mostly due to high maintenance and lower social impacts and sustainability. So the next steps take the city weighting criteria that the city developed.
Mayor?
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Young.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly, would you go back one slide?
Yes, please.
And I'm just curious, looking at gasification, it's also scored a 69. Why was that not necessarily in the next yellow category up?
That's a good point. Yeah, it probably should have gotten a yellow instead of a red.
It could have been yellow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, the only reason these were grouped the way they were is it was just groups of 4.
Oh.
So the next steps here was to take the weighting criteria that was developed for each one of the scoring criteria by the Public Works Committee and determine the top 3 technologies as it relates to the city and the city's goals. And then if the council and the mayor are amenable to move forward with a detailed evaluation of the top 3 technologies in the engineering report, and if hydrothermal liquefaction is one of the options that is deemed feasible to move forward with evaluating in the engineering report, apply for the funding for that or any other ones as it's available. So that's the end of the presentation right now. We can take the time to actually look at how the Public Works Committee scoring came out, or we can answer any other questions that you have right now.
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Walters.
I don't think we really need to take a look at the Public Works Committee scoring because that is informed simply by one member of the Public Works Committee. I think the rest of us took a look at that scoring sheet and either didn't understand it or didn't really agree with the methodology. And for the potential investment that we're talking about here, $10 million, $20 million, I'm not even certain of what scale. That's probably an all council decision rather than a Public Works Committee decision. We haven't seen this presentation prior to tonight. It's not in our packet. I think we're going to need a little time to digest it. Excuse the pun.
Mayor Gear.
Mr. Miller.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Mr. Walters more on that sentiment of just seeing the packet now. Great information, first of all. One question that jumped out at me on the cost analysis was the cost of dumping, I guess, biosolids. Obviously, FBI is pretty low cost for what we do with the FBI ash, essentially. But for biosolids, I was curious if that was factored into the cost calculation.
That is considered part of the operational and maintenance costs of those processes.
I guess what I'm getting at is some of those aren't, in Washington, some areas, some places don't accept certain types of the biosolids, and the transportation cost to the system, where being able to go to our local landfill, vice having to drive to Eastern Washington, for example, that's the kind of detailed cost I was wondering that was included.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And if you look at the cost on O&M cost, for things like aerobic digestion, alkaline stabilization, those are going to have high O&M costs, not just from the chemical, but also on the disposal side. Class B products, for the most part in Washington State, need to be hauled east of the mountains. So there are high hauling costs associated with that.
So those were factored into the calculation?
Yes, they are.
Great. Yeah, I again need more time to look at the slides. Like I said, it's great stuff. I don't think I'd be able to pick out my top 3 without digging deep in this presentation.
Mayor Gear?
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Young and then Mr. McDougall.
Yeah, I can't agree more with my fellow councilmen and women. But one of the things that I also want us to keep in mind is that there are grant funding opportunities for us to mitigate those costs. So I think that even if we are not prepared to move forward with a selection or a narrowing at this point, I do think that it's to our benefit to begin the preparation for advancing the grants and the research that may mitigate our cost. And I don't want us to miss that. And secondarily to that, in reasoning for not necessarily moving forward tonight with a narrowing, unless other council members are ready, is that I really want us to consider how this may be impactful for the possibility of our area becoming a blue zone. I'm still very interested in looking at that and how, the emissions and how we might do that. But ultimately, I think it's crucially important that we keep in mind the timelines that Mr. Buckermeyer brought forward about applying for the grant and reasonably thinking that if we are going to do something, that we can move forward the grant preparation now as a forward investment such that should we make a decision, we can use those grant funds if we're granted them. Thank you.
Mr. McDougall.
Thank you. And I'm in general agreement with my fellow council members as well. I did have a quick question, Mr. Kelly, if you could go back to the big table. Yeah, that one, thank you. I was kind of looking at like the high score, the ones that scored high, and what the places where they got low scores, and kind of the risk essentially of those high score ones. And under the regulatory, the last item there, impact to future N limits. I forget, what did that mean?
N limits are the future nitrogen limits that you may have for your treatment plant. Your effluent discharge is potentially subject to a nitrogen limit in the future, as Ecology is considering that right now.
Okay, what would that mean, like for the solutions that score like a 1, 2, or 3?
Yeah, what that means is for some of these options, you'll have a recycle flow. They generate a dewatering flow that has to be recycled back to the head of the treatment plant and treated, especially those around digestion, hydrothermal liquefaction, pyrolysis. That recycle flow contains a high concentration of nitrogen due to each one of those processes, how it destroys the solids. And so it actually increases the nitrogen load. The fluidized bed incinerator that you have right now, you have no real recycle with that. You have some dewatering stream, but because it doesn't undergo any digestion or solids destruction, you don't recycle nitrogen with that stream. So the nitrogen actually feeds into the incinerator, and it ends up either in the ash product or actually emitted up your stack as part of the emissions from the incinerator.
I noticed, thank you. I noticed the two highest scoring options, their lowest scores happen to be on that future nitrogen limits. So does that, like if that regulatory control occurs, does it strand any investment in this asset, or does it just require some mitigation funds, or like how drastic is that with that?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. No, it does not strand the funds there. There are mitigation steps that you can take. There are processes that we use that we call side stream treatment that actually remove the nitrogen from the side stream. There is an added cost associated with that as well, which is partially factored into the lower scores there. For instance, you may have heard of the Chambers Creek wastewater treatment plant in Pierce County. They installed a side stream nitrogen removal system called Anamox. It's a specific type of bacteria that removes it actually at fairly low energy use. But that's a type of technology that you would likely have to put in with any of these options that scored at a 3 or lower. And the cost of that is more based on the flow that it's treating, and not as much based on the amount of nitrogen, though both play a factor.
Okay. And does the probability of having to add that cost to those that scored 3 or less, was that added to the cost score as well then?
That is partially figured into the capital cost, but it wasn't weighted quite the same given the uncertainty around what the future nitrogen limits may look like. Unless they're exceedingly low, you may not have to do that level of side stream treatment.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Miller.
Yeah, I just, my warning flag goes off whenever I need to be rushed to make weigh in on a decision in order to make a certain timeline for such a substantial project that, you know, like Mr. Walter said, this could be 20 million, but I've seen some wastewater treatment plants, granted larger cities, you know, $1 billion with a B. I mean, these are expensive projects. And the point on grant funding, that's typically to build it. It doesn't get into the O&M, the ongoing operational costs. And you can give me all the grant funding in the world, and we build something that has unproven technology that doesn't work, and it doesn't work. So I guess my overall point is, you know, if we need to still make a timeline in a month, I'd be happy to look at this in the next week or so, and give me time to think about what my top 3 would be and try to even narrow it down to 1. So when council comes back, we could all be ready to talk about, okay, let's get our top 1 that we can agree on, or at least vote on our top 2 or 3 that we think Public Works should go forward with. Thank you.
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Young, then Ms. Moulton.
Just to sort of follow up on Mr. Miller's point and the others, you know, I totally agree. I do think, though, that just want to remind council that in the comparison, I believe Mr. Buckenmeyer mentioned that there was also possibility of funding to do a comparison as well, which allows us that, you know, additional depth of thought into whichever situation we believe works best for the city of Anacortes. Is that correct, Mr. Buckenmeyer?
Yes. So I guess with the next, so I guess maybe the problem we're trying to solve is that if we want to be considered for this next level of funding, we have to select 3 alternatives or 2 alternatives to compare to what the existing one that we have, produce an engineering report, and then that would let the Department of Energy, you know, give us the thumbs up or thumbs down. I think John Willis might be able to help more on exactly how that works. But
to that, just in follow-up to my initial question, so there's a timeline associated with that, correct? I think if that's so, I think that timeline that we're working on, and optimally what would be the best way for us to get to that point, you know, what timelines we have. Do we have another week or 2 weeks before we really are at this critical decision of evaluation? I think that would be helpful information for council as well, as we decide how and what we want to do to go forward.
Okay, and again, I'm going to let, if council's got a few minutes, I'm going to let John Willis kind of explain the next steps in again, if we want to do this, and that's how I started. If mayor and council don't want to do this, I'm happy to just keep a fluid bed and incinerator running.
Mayor Gear?
Yeah, Ms. Moulton, and then I have a question for Fred. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Thanks. I have a question for Ms. Finzel. I'd like to take one more look at that larger matrix if we could. Because one of the options that jumped out at me that got a really low score was the supercritical water oxidation. And when that's the one that produces ash and clean water, the pros were there's funding available, it's a small footprint, and it produces a low number of greenhouse gases. when I look across the table at the cost, the funding opportunity says 2, which I don't know, maybe I'm reading this wrong, and maybe this is a conversation outside of council, but I feel like that seems like that would be higher. Also, the low greenhouse gas emissions down under sustainability, it seems like that would get a higher rating. So also there's one other thing here, that 2 is an orange in social impacts instead of a yellow. I don't know, I'm sort of like maybe drilling down too much, but I don't, based on what I saw about the pros and cons compared to some of the other things, I don't understand why that scored so low. Maybe you can speak to that a little bit, Ms. Finzel.
Sure, I'm actually going to have Rick actually speak to the scoring.
Sure. Yeah, I can talk to some of that. So on the funding aspect, a 2 means that there is funding available, but it's likely in the form of SRF loans. So when we said that funding is likely available, it's most likely in the form of an SRF loan. The Ecology also has funding available for processes that can significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions, essentially sequester greenhouse gases. Supercritical water oxidation, while it offsets greenhouse gas that is produced by the energy it's required, it does not actually serve as a greenhouse gas sink, which is why it got a 3 score there instead of something higher. Whereas, you know, a process like Class A temperature phased anaerobic digestion produces a methane product that can be reused as a non-greenhouse gas fuel source, and it can actually offset more greenhouse gas and become net greenhouse gas negative.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
And then on the color coding issues, that is just an Excel error, and it goes by the rows. So in some cases, a 2 might be an orange because it's the middle, but then again, you see here, there's a 2 and a 3, it is an orange. So it's really just an Excel error.
Yeah.
Okay.
Supercritical water oxidation does require an air permit as well, which is why it got a lower score there.
Okay, great. That's helpful. Thank you.
So,
Mayor Garrett.
Yes, Christine, go ahead.
Thank you. Kind of going off what Councilmember Young mentioned, and I thought I had really good eyesight, but I am having a real challenge kind of reading the technology scoring just because my screen is small. So I'm trying to, I can pick out things, but to get an overall sense, I would really appreciate getting a copy of the slide so I can kind of read the summary of pros and cons and then put it next to this scoring grid. I guess though, for our timeline and trying to make sure that we stay within it, if it makes sense, right, and stay on schedule if we want to make application. And you guys are the experts, and also the Public Works Committee. My question is, I can't tell, are there 3 that kind of have risen up to the surface as the most of having the highest potential? I know we have the scoring summary, but again, it's 75, 72. I don't know how that really fits in when it's put into practice. So I'm just kind of curious from the committee or from you guys as experts, is there 3 options that really make it that we should move forward with, or are there really 5 or 6 and we need to drill down and have further discussion on them? If you guys have any insight to that, I appreciate hearing your thoughts.
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Young.
Yes, no, to respond to Councilwoman Cleland McGrath, quite honestly, you know, we had a great meeting prior to this one where much of this was presented initially, and in some detail it really was. But I don't believe we've had enough time to truly determine which of these we want to move forward, because what we were really evaluating is the matrix with which they were evaluated, the cost associated with each. The consulting company did a superb job of explaining it, but the timeline was so short in coming here. So, you know, again, that's why I think it's important that council can, as you said, see these slides, look back at how they were evaluated, but also at if the funding portion of this in preparation for any grant or opportunity funding, that maybe we should consider authorizing Public Works to begin the process of moving that forward as we take whatever time's necessary to review all of the options and decide which ones work for us. I hope I answered your question for you, though.
So thank you, Anthony. So I think before we turn it over to John, I think he was going to answer some questions. Fred, you keep saying, if, you know, council and mayor, you know, if you decide to do this, I guess my question to you, and this is mainly for the public to understand, what is the life left in our present facility, realistically? But, you know, we're now in that, I'm not sure how many, 25 years old, maybe, I'm not sure the date. Our costs are going up every year. So if not this year, when? When is like an absolute, when does this thing wear out? We don't have another choice.
Yeah. The jet going over. Can everybody hear me still? Okay. I don't know if there's a good answer for that, Mayor Gear. So maybe an analogy. I mean, I can keep any vehicle going forever. You just got to keep replacing parts on it, and it's, you know, it's going to nickel and dime you to death. And you know, when do you make that decision to buy a new one? It's you know, we're going to be able to keep it running, barring a, you know, a catastrophic failure of the thing, but we haven't seen anything out there that lends us to believe that.
Well, what about the air quality issues I've heard about tonight? Is that going to become more and more of a challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we will, you know, continue to be fighting that. At some point, you know, well, maybe there'll be air quality fines in our future. You know, I don't, you know, that could happen.
Future meaning a year, 5 years?
Boy, I don't, yeah, I'm going to go with 5, right?
Okay.
But at that point, we spend more money on dealing with the air emissions part of it, right?
And every year, what have we been averaging every year in maintenance?
I forgot that number.
Is it a half million, a million?
I'm going to go with an average of $500,000, yeah, something
per
like that.
year, and that will continue into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and probably get worse, right?
Okay. Okay. I wanted a little perspective on that.
Yeah.
Okay. So, John, a lot of questions have been asked. Anthony, one more thing, and then we're going to go over to John.
Okay. No, I appreciate it. You know, again, I just want to emphasize that, you know, the air quality that's coming out is not something that we can just sort of say, you know, we can pass over, because the reality of what's coming out, new studies, new thoughts are just something that we really need to deal with and make it part of the priority for us as well. And so that, I just wanted to make sure that that was up front.
So I'm going to throw one more thing in before John gets going, Mayor. So really the impetus for what we're doing here is, you know, trying to take advantage of or take a hard look at this HTL technology. If it's not that we're interested in, then we got lots of time, right? There's an opportunity coming up in our near future where we can get that prototype that's being built in California. So if that's not going to be one of our top 3, you know, we'll bring this back in a couple of years, kind of, I mean, probably a metaphorical speaking, but there's certainly not tonight, you know, the real, I guess, opportunity that we're trying to you know, to seize here is that there's a grant coming up, and I want John to speak a little bit about the magnitude of scale. Is it you know, is it $1,000 grant, or is it going to pay for half of this thing, right? That's coming up fast, and so if we're not interested in pursuing that, then let's just take a break for a year or so and come back at this.
But just the one, it does score the highest and there's money available. Is
Yeah.
that correct? Okay. So John, you heard a lot of questions, and can you kind of sum this up for us and help us give a good foundation to the homework that the council has to do in the next week or two as they study all these proposals? And you need to unmic you're muted. We can't hear you.
How about now?
Now we can. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry to kill a few more seconds there. Hey, so so the DOE grant is it's due on June 20th. So that's pretty soon, and it's a big grant application. But it would pay for half of the project costs. So we've been working with Washington Ecology and the State Revolving Fund, and Anacortes, if you haven't already gotten confirmation, they're giving you a very low interest loan. The next step is to compare keeping the fluidized beds with 2 other technologies. There's a potential to get another 25% of the construction paid for with green reserves if it's a green technology and will produce renewable energy and create resource recovery for you. So there are a few different places to get the money. What we're asking for, I think, by next council meeting, because then I think you missed the following week, is whether or not hydrothermal liquefaction is one of the 2 choices that you'd like to see investigated. Because if it's not, then there's really not a reason for us to go spend the effort to try and get a grant to pay for half of it. So that's what we're working on now. I think we can get you the slides, look through them. If there are questions, let's make sure we get them all answered next week. The piece, the next step, and this is the Washington Ecology Engineering Report, is a comparison of what you've got and 2 other technologies. And that's where we'll do all the engineering work and the math. What's this going to cost to build? Where's the money coming from? What is the greenhouse gas implication of this? How many truckloads of what has to go where every month? We're going to do other things like talk to Marathon and see whether they're willing to accept the biocrude, because that would make it a lot cheaper than taking it somewhere else. So there are a lot of engineering questions that study would allow us to evaluate. And yet we could put in the grant application, and we probably won't hear for 6 to 8 months whether we've won it or not won it. But this is a gradual process. You got to study it, then you got to design it. At the same time, there is a facility, a system going in at Vancouver that's the same size as yours. So when that gets installed, probably about this time next year, the plant staff would take a trip to Vancouver, British Columbia, and check it out. The other thing that's nice about that is if some piece of equipment is failing, you tell that and you buy a different piece of equipment, or you buy 2 of them. So the idea is we'll learn along the way, and you're not getting serial number 1, but you would get serial number 2 after an educational experience, as well as us rolling up our sleeves to figure out what the economics are and what the greenhouse gas accounting is and what the long-term situation would be if you had one of these. So, and it's one of whatever's, right? I mean, we're looking at 2 different technologies. So if the council agrees or likes 2 of them better than the other ones at the end of next week's meeting, then I think we're in good shape to go ahead, try and get the DOE money. And then that's not your official decision, right? The official decision is when we get done with the engineering report and you figure out how much better is it. So it does encumber some cost and you decide you're going to do it, but there's got to be a reason to do it. And this is this high level look to see whether or not it sounds like something you'd like to have.
Mayor Gear?
Yes, Mr. Walters.
How much does it cost us to get to the engineering report? Are we anticipating spending money to get to the grant application, and then do we have to win the grant in order to get to the engineering report?
No,
What's the sequence?
so the submission for the engineering report has already been done. I think what I saw was you were ranked number 20th out of like 120 projects to get money from Washington Ecology. So I think you're going to get that. I think you only find out for sure that they're going to pay for it like at the end of June. So we're a little further off from knowing you got it, but you can take a look at the listing and see where you fall on the list. And it's less than a 1% interest loan. So it's not free, but it's pretty good money. So
and so then what does it cost us to do the engineering report?
Brindley, do you remember what the value was on that?
I don't. I could look it up quickly.
I think it was, well, yeah, if I throw out a number, it's not going to be right.
Yeah,
but,
one thing I know, yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is it 300 to 400? I can't remember exactly what it was.
I think it was 250 to
250,
325 or something like that.
325, yeah.
Something in that range.
And so there's another grant application process that we are theoretically eligible for, and it's this other grant that the timeline is coming up in June.
That's correct, and that's a DOE. It's under the Bioenergy Technology Office. They've got a funding request out right now, and it's due on the 20th. That would pay for half of the project costs. So if the project ends up costing $10 million, they would pay $5 million. If it ends up costing $14 million, they'd pay $7 million. And the rest would be eligible for a loan from with the Green Reserve with up to a 25% paid for by Washington Ecology as principal forgiveness. So there are two different places you could get a grant, basically.
So saying we got that money, would we need the engineering report that we would be funding with this revolving fund loan?
You do. The first step for Washington Ecology, they have 3 steps in their process. They want you to study it to convince them and you that it's a good idea, which makes sense, right? It's more than the study we've just done. It's what's it going to cost? What are the benefits? Where's it going to go? Then they make you do the detailed design you would apply for this fall. And then you would apply for the capital money the following fall. And that's just the way Washington Ecology does the loans. They like to see those phases done sequentially if you're going to get it. And in order to get the principal forgiveness, which is the 25% Green Reserve, you have to go through the first 2 processes with them.
Okay, so that I think is some helpful background. In terms of the scoring, I think that would be more useful to us if we all participated, maybe even right now, but maybe later if we want, in making some high-level judgments about the high-level categories that you have on your scoring sheet. And I don't have it in front of me, and it's not in the packet, but odor generation is one of the categories. I bet we have a good opinion on odor generation. I think we don't like it, and I think we could write that down. The level of effect on nitrogen going forward, I don't think we have a good sense of that. I think the capital cost and how much we value the lower capital cost over a higher capital cost up front, maybe. But it's those high level categories rather than the intermediate or the lower level categories that we might not even understand that I think are more at the council level that we could dig into. But the other thing that I don't really see in the chart is uncertainty, because I assume that a technology that has never been used ever has a high level of uncertainty associated with its scores. It rose to the top, but if we are uncertain about whether this aspect works this way or these parts are reliable or not, how is it that we can really judge that number and generate that score with any level of confidence?
Those are real good questions, and we don't have We have a mass and energy balance. We've seen how it works at pilot scale, but that's smaller scale than what you would have. From an energy perspective, it looks really good, but from your point, you got to keep it working. The other piece that went into the engineering report was condition assessment, taking a look at how much trouble you have meeting the air permit. And it should answer some of the questions that people were asking about. Is this going to die in 5 years, 7 years, 20 years? And like Fred said, you can keep almost anything running, but once your car's got 400,000 miles on it, it costs a lot to keep it going. So I don't get the feeling you're at that point, but my understanding is there were troubles meeting air permitting, and the air permitting will get tighter on the incinerator in 2027.
Well, and maybe that's the target date for replacement. It seems to me that if we have a $500,000 expense coming up this year on the incinerator, then we just do, because none of these technologies are going to replace it during 2021. We're going to have to keep the incinerator going for the near future regardless. So those costs are essentially sunk, and they shouldn't factor into the analysis. What should is beyond the point at which we could have replaced the incinerator and the costs going forward after that. So I think we need to be upfront about those costs that we're going to incur for sure, because we simply can't replace it fast enough. And then if we incur those costs, do we get any more life out of it? Or maybe, like you say, the real important date is 2027 when the regulatory environment changes, regardless of whether we can continue to physically operate the incinerator. But I'd like to have all that on a slide as well, so we can see all that in one spot.
So Becky has a lot of that information, I believe. And what we were planning on doing was taking a good hard look during the engineering report and seeing how much money the city has spent on your incinerators in the last 7 to 10 years. And then taking that going forward and take a look whether it is cranking up and getting to be considerably more each year, or whether it's been relatively flat over that period. So we would project forward some maintenance cost going forward, to your point, Councilman Walters. So I think we do want to try and match up your costs with what these other things would do. And that's part of what the condition assessment does. To your point, the $500,000 this year is spent. So this is what is, if you say we're going to make a left turn, you may still spend $2 million on incinerators before any alternative gets in place.
I also just want to say that I appreciate the staff and consultant excitement about the potential for green tech here. And I perceive that is what's driving a lot of this, because this new tech, this hydrothermal liquefaction, has the potential for producing a net greenhouse gas emission overall that's negative, and potentially producing a biofuel that can be used potentially by the refineries. It's just that there's a lot of uncertainty for me about that. And given the small size of our operation, are we going to produce enough biofuel for it to be attractive to any particular buyer? I mean, if we don't produce enough, can they even use it? So all of that uncertainty makes me very hesitant to commit to anything or get the ball rolling in a direction that we can't stop it.
So all I can say to answer that is we are aware there is one petroleum refiner. It's called Parkland Fuels, and they're based in Vancouver, British Columbia. And Parkland has a commitment to accept these biological crude oils from plants that generate them. And they're working closely with Metro Vancouver on their project. Okay. So our most expensive thing that the city of Anacortes would have to do is haul a truck that way twice a week to take the bio crude up there and bring your fuel back. So
Becky did speak with Marathon, and they are willing to take it at least at a preliminary level, our local refinery.
And you asked the question about scale. The reason why Marathon's willing to take it is because it's a drop in the bucket, and they can do it. They're going to get a little bit of RINs off it. Everybody can feel green about it. But the good news is you can get rid of it. And, and it's going to cost a lot less, probably nothing at all to get rid of it. In fact, they'll pay you for the biocrude, and people won't generally pay you for your dewatered cake biosolids. So it does create a revenue stream that when you look at the life cycle would be good, would be positive. So all of this and exactly what the numbers are, we won't know until we do the engineering report. And then we'll present that to the council, and you guys can make a more informed decision as to what this, is this really something you want to do, or will the incinerator will last another 15 years, so there's no problem there.
So it sounds to me like the council wants time to analyze what you got tonight, time to think about it, analyze it, and when would be next week or the first week in June? When I've forgotten what you said, John, would be the good time to come back.
I'd really like to try and do it next week if we can.
Okay. All right.
If there are still questions, we can kick it down the road.
Okay.
And what do you want to say? If the council feels good about two options that seem like they're worth studying and meet the objectives of the city, then I'd like to, at that point, say, yeah, let's do it. If one of those two options, and if it turns out neither of them is hydrothermal liquefaction, to Fred's point, we've just taken our foot off the pedal because we don't have to respond to this DOE opportunity. The DOE opportunity, getting your sludge facility half paid by somebody else, is not nothing to bat your eyes at, right? So anyway, it's an opportunity, and if the information you get, if there are questions, let's dig into the questions. And I think this makes a lot of sense. I appreciate everybody's time tonight. It's been a while.
Get a head nod on next week from the council.
Yes.
That works. Okay. Sounds like we're all willing.
That's a really full agenda.
Yeah, oh, I know that, but we'll we can do. Mr. Young.
Yeah, no, back to Mr. Ryan's, Mr. Walters' point about those things that matter most to each of us as council members. I think that will be important. For me, emissions are going to be very important because, I just want to weigh that into the matrix, if that's possible. But I am looking forward to, finishing, at least moving forward, this discussion next week.
Okay.
Is there a way to get that input? Or are we just going to do it live from then? Or I'm trying to think how to do it, and
yeah.
Let's do it live.
Okay.
Mayor Garrett?
Yes, Mr. Walters.
Should we also get some sense of the financial scale here? We're not talking about replacing the whole plant, but we're talking about eliminating the incinerator. Is this a $1, $5, $10, $25 million project? Potentially.
So it's dangerous. My company doesn't let me throw out capital cost estimates, but
I would say yes to that question, Ryan. Yeah.
Yes.
Probably. It's probably closer.
In the material that we get to you, maybe Fred, you could come up with something.
Probably closer to 20 than it is 10.
Okay, that's something.
Okay, so if you could get that material to the council, and we'll juggle the agenda and we'll revisit it next week. Are there any other questions for our guests tonight? All right, thank you. Great discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, good discussion. Thank you.
Some of you joined us from very far away. It's probably late at night where you live.
It's getting close, but not that bad. It's been nice. It's been a good day.
Well, thank you. All right.
Thanks much.
Well, if there's no other discussion at this time, I'll adjourn the meeting. We'll see you all next week. Thank you.
Take care. Good night.
Night.